we have shifted from the idea that we were hunting the gene of extreme longevity. If you have that gene, you have won the lotteries, right? We have realized that actually there are many, many ways in which people reach extreme old age. And the more data we collect, the more this heterogeneity increases.
Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, how to live a longer, healthier life. We are produced by InstaTracker, your science-based guide to optimize your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Paola Sebastiani, a professor of Biostatistics at Tufts Clinical and Translational Science Institute and a senior investigator with the New England Centenarian study. Dr. Sebastiani is internationally recognized for her work on genetics, molecular biology, and biomarker of exceptional longevity, helping define how centenarians and their families resist age-related diseases and maintain function late into life. Paola, welcome to Longevity by Design.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor.
Yeah, it's an honor for me, and I'm very excited about this discussion. But before we dive in, for our audience, if you are enjoying Longevity by Design, please like, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. It's help others find this science-first conversation. So, Paola, I want to start by asking you, what do we currently know about genetic contribution to exceptional longevity? How heritable is living to 100 compared to the average lifespan?
Right. So we know a lot, and I would say that for the last 30 years, there's been a growing interest in identifying genetic factors that allow some individuals to reach very old ages. And Tom Pearls, who is the director of the New England Centenarian study, started to put together a cohort of centenarians and their siblings in the mid-90s. And after almost 30 years, we have thousands of centenarians with genetic data that we can study. We started to use the technology of Genome-Wide association studies in around 2008. And back then, we analyzed, I think it was the first study of centenarians in which we ran a Genome-Wide association study. It was small, they only included 800 people. And even with that small sample size, we identified one of the most replicated finding of genetic of longevity, which is APOE. Yeah. And over the years, as we enroll more centenarians, we got their DNA, we have expanded our sample sizes. So now the list of genetic variants that correlate with longevity keep growing. So now we have a clear replicated association with a locus on chromosome 9, which has the gene CDKN2B. We have association with many other genes. And this is all possible because people have joined forces and enroll large number of centenarians, and it's an extremely difficult, challenging task. But we have multiple studies that now we work to really clarify, identify genes that are associated with extreme longevity.
Yeah, and can you define what is a genome-associated study?
Yes. So the technology allows us nowadays to interrogate, that's how we started, to interrogate the position of the genome that are known to be polymorphic. So some individuals have, say, the letter A, and others have the letter C. And this number of position is huge, but we started with the initial technology by interrogating 10,000, and then the technology quickly ramped up to allow us to interrogate hundreds of thousands. And 15 years ago, the world shifted to whole genome sequencing, and so now we can easily speaking to interrogate 50 million bases, and we just need a lot of computing power to analyze all this data. But we can interrogate many positions on the genome.
Yeah, And you discussed before the APOE and APOE4. We know a lot about it and the intersection basically with dementia. But
Right.
from my knowledge, there are not other strong genes such as the APOE that actually increase the longevity of centenarian. But we have a lot of small ones that for each centenarian maybe have a specific change, a specific change that allow him to live longer. Why is it so diffused, and why don't we have a few genes that if you have them, then you live longer? What is your hypothesis?
I think we are. I think we have over the years we have shifted from the idea that we were hunting the gene of extreme longevity. If you have that gene, you have won the lotteries, right? We have realized that actually there are many ways in which people reach extreme old age. And the more data we collect, the more this heterogeneity increases. We really see a variety of types of aging. And that in particular may explain why the genetics is so difficult, because we put everybody in one bucket and then we compare with everybody else.
Yeah.
But it also opens the door to many therapeutics, because there may be a bucket of genes that allow people to reach extreme longevity in a certain way, other genes that allow individuals to reach longevity in different ways. But we have many positions now on the genome that are really interesting targets. In addition to chromosome 9, there is one region on chromosome 6, which there is a locus of the related to inflammation, inflammatory genes that is really important for longevity. And only some studies have shown that association in part because maybe it was a group of centenarians that is different from other centenarians.
Yeah. And not recently, but there is a new tool that called Polygenic risk score that basically allow us, just to explain to our audience, it's allow us, instead of looking at one gene and its effect on, in this example, a long life, to look at many genes and see a correlation of a score with long life. So how that new, relative new tool, let's say, allow us to understand better extreme longevity?
Right. And so the idea is that there are many genes that contribute to the genetic background of centenarians. And so if one step back, when we started to study the genetic of extreme longevity on a large scale at the level of the whole genome, we already thought that the hypothesis of one single gene was kind of naive. And so we came up with this idea of creating genetic signatures. So we identified about 200 genes that were associated with individually with the ability of living to very old ages. But individually, they explain very little of this chance. And then we started looking at their combination. And we realized that when you look at their combination, people who have a certain combination of this gene maybe reach age beyond 110 years. And people who have a different combination maybe reach, past the age of 100, but they have diseases. They have a higher risk for cancer. So we created these signatures that showed you have to move away from one single gene and start thinking about dividing. And the polygenic risk score is the idea of combining the effect of many genes into one single score. And they work well for many complex traits, so traits that are supposed to be determined by many genes together. For longevity, I think we are not at the point that we have enough genes to make them work really well. Mm-hmm. So that's we still have a lot of work to do in terms of the genetics of extreme longevity.
So we cannot use yet the polygenic risk score to come and say to a person, you have a better chance to cross 100 or not. We might be there, but not today. That's fair to say?
I think we are getting closer and closer, but we are not there yet, honestly. We are not there yet.
And then what do we miss, in your opinion? We miss more centenarian to build a better model, or we need to understand more genes, or what are the next steps to get to that?
Yeah, the next step is to have a larger number of people in the studies. And I remember I mentioned our first study had 800 centenarians. And in the last paper we published a couple of years ago, we managed to get up to 2,000, which is a huge record for us. Now, think about studies of the genetics of complex traits like type 2 diabetes or stroke, etc. They work with the sample sizes of 500,000 people. We will never reach that. We will never find 500,000 centenarians. So we have to be smarter, right? More creative, but we need to more sample size. But the good news is that over the years, there's been more interest in supporting these studies. And so Tom and I have contributed to the Long Life Family Study. It was established in 2005 with fundings from the NIH. The study is still ongoing. It enrolled 5,000 people from families with evidence of longevity. And over the years, they have, many of the people enrolled that were people in their 90s have actually reached age 100.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have now this new bucket of individuals. And in 2019, we established two new studies of centenarians. One is called the Integrated Longevity Omics. And one is called the Longevity Consortium Centenarian Study. In one, we enrolled 1,500 people, including about 600 centenarians. And in the other, we enrolled about 400 people with about 150 centenarians. And now we are at the phase in which we need to generate the genetic data for these people, but our sample size will double.
Yeah.
So as we get larger sample size, then we can have more robust finding. What we see is a lot of results that are almost passing the bar of statistical significance, but we're not there yet. We just have to increase the sample size.
Okay.
But I think I'm very optimistic now that we have a lot of data that we've generated in the last few years. And also, something that is really important is we focus a lot on single variants, single position of the genome. But the genetics is not just single variants. There are a lot of structural variation in the genome, insertion, deletion, translocation of pieces of a chromosome into another chromosome. And also the other aspect of genetics that we have overlooked because we didn't have enough data is mitochondrial DNA. And so there is a lot of direction that ourselves, we can't explore all of them, but we are committed to generate data and also share the data with the community. And we are now in the process of sharing a lot of genetic data with the community.
Yeah, and just for our audience, the mitochondria is a small DNA that have a few tens of genes that basically resemble genetics of bacteria in a way, very similar to bacteria. And that can be also, might be a reason why someone live longer and someone is not.
Right.
A follow-up question to you, Paola, is can you give our audience more or less what are the chances for someone that was born today, let's say, to reach to 100? Is it what are the chances?
This is a very difficult question. I can tell you, if we go back, 120 years ago, I can tell you that for people who were born in 1900, the chances, how many of these individuals managed to reach age 100, and the numbers are very small. I actually wrote them down last night. The number was 0.2% of male reached age 100, and a little bit more than 1% females reach age 100. That was 120 years ago.
Okay.
So it's a very small number. After 20 years, so if we look at 1920 and we look at the centenarians nowadays, the numbers have gone up by 0.3% male. So we went from 0.2% to 0.3%. And for females, we've gone up by 1.2% to 1.4%.
Wow.
And this happened over 20 years. So a very small increase. So the claim that 50% of women born today will reach age 100, I think we have to be a little careful. It seems like, I don't know, maybe, but I don't know that we have any strong evidence to supporting this. But definitely there's been a major impact of vaccination that has really reduced the child mortality in the 30s. And that is going to have a major impact on the lifespan.
Yeah.
But from here, I don't want to honestly, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. And I'm kind of skeptical of people say 50% of people will get 100.
No,
think
no,
we have to be cautious.
I think that you gave a good answer. I think that's good for the audience to understand that centenarian are pretty rare. It's much
Yeah.
less than 1%, at least for the people that were born 100 years ago. But the good news is, as you said, if we move 20 years later, it's increased between 50% to 100% more. So from 0.2% to 0.3% for males and 0.2% to 0.4% for females. So the good news is more and more people are living longer, but still it's a very small minority of the
Yes,
population.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And I think for us, it's also really important to keep in mind that nobody wants to live a long life and being sick, right?
Yeah.
Because what is attractive on for that scenario? But what we want to, our goal when we study centenarians and the genetic of centenarians is to understand how many of these people reach extreme old ages, but in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And we have seen many examples of people who live in a healthy way, they live independently, they're cognitively intact, and then they compress the time of disease to the very end of their life. And that's for us is the goal. Can we learn from centenarians their secrets? It can be their genes in their diets or a combination of both, and understand what make them be so successful in terms of the health span.
Yeah.
And that's really the major goal.
Yeah, and that's an excellent point, Paola. That basically, if you think about centenarian, that's what I understand. And again, I have here an expert, so correct me if I'm wrong. The big difference between them and the normal people, let's say the rest of the 99 point whatever percentage, is that they're started to be sick much later in life than us. The rest is the same. They decline as well, but the decline is, let's say, shifting by, let's say, 20 years. So 20 years
Right.
later, average person have diabetes, let's say at the age of 60, I'm just saying, they might have it only at the age of 80, and the same cardiovascular diseases and dementia and so on. So that's the secret of centenarian in a high level, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have seen many examples, and this is particularly true for people who manage to live beyond 105 years, 110. These are extremely, extremely rare people. But I actually met many, well, many. These are very rare people, so not that many, but I've met a few, we call them supercentenarians, so people who live past the age of 110. And a couple of these people were in a spectacular condition. One person was 113 years old. He was living in an assisted facility because he just didn't want to live by himself, but he was pretty independent. And when he talked to me, he asked why I was so interested in talking to him. And I said, would you like to know the difference between the Great Depression of 1929 and the Depression of 2008? I thought, well, if you want to tell me, yes, go ahead. And so he spoke for 10, 15 minutes, telling me the differences. And really the goal is if I want to get old, but I want to get old that way, not to
Yeah.
be functioning person, not a burden to everyone, to anyone, but really active and happy. He was a very happy guy.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned another very interesting point, the supercentenarian, that basically people that live more than 110. So what is the probability for the same person that was born in 1920 to live to 100, or let's say 1910, let's say, because they live at 10.
I think the probability is extremely, like there will be maybe beyond the 110, there may be 5 people out of 100,000. Just
Yeah.
very, very small,
So,
very
so,
rare.
ba- so basically, what I heard from an interview in the past that above 100 is more or less every year you have like 50% chance to live or to die, something like that. That's fair to say?
I haven't checked the numbers myself, but I believe so. And I want us to also keep in mind that some of the tables that are done by demographer or the U.S. Social Security Administration, some of the tables are interpolation, a prediction, mathematical
Yeah,
prediction,
yeah,
and the numbers tend to be slightly different. So for the 1900 cohort, and now we have complete data because people born in 1900, nobody's lived beyond the age 119 in the United States. So we have
yeah,
pretty much a complete cohort. The numbers of individuals who have reached those ages is extremely small.
yeah.
You count them in each.
Yeah, so it's basically logarithmic difference between the people, the amount of people that live to 100 and 110. It's almost impossible to reach to 110. That's
Yes. And that's why there was a group who they keep a record of the Supercentenarians, and usually these people are very well known, their websites with their name, etc. And every point in time, there are like 20 people alive, 15 people alive who have passed those ages all over the world, not just in
wow.
the United States.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's basically very hard to research them because we were complaining that the n number of the centenarian is low. Here is a super low, let's say. It's almost zero.
Yes,
Yeah.
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 But the one thing that we have, and that's not me, Stompers, who had this vision years ago, was he really appreciated the rarity of these people. And so he decided to enroll as many as possible. So in his study, he now has more than 200 people who have reached age 110. And this happened over 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. And I assume that he collected blood, and now we can do proteomics, metabolomics, and all of that. So
Yes.
hopefully,
Yes.
we'll have a better understanding of those very, very rare population. So you mentioned when we started the discussion, you mentioned APOE and its effect on longevity. So why, in your opinion, APOE is so important to cross the 100 mark and maybe the 110? And how do you relate it to the fact that ApoE4, for example, is a very strong variable that can suggest whether you will have dementia or not?
Right. So the APOE gene is associated with is a apolipoprotein, so it's associated with the transport of lipids, and mutation in these genes determine the risk for Alzheimer's disease, and that's APOE4, or the opposite, a rare mutation is associated with living to older ages. Now, the mechanism why this happens is not really understood. And it's interesting that this has been the target of many, many studies, but the mechanism is not understood. What we know is APOE2 is actually a kind of an interesting variant because we have evidence that carriers of this variant live longer on average. But also, there is evidence that carriers of this variant may have increased risk for some diseases. And it's odd. This evidence conflict, but it could also be that APOE is not the whole story. It's a major player in the genetic of aging and longevity, but in combination with other variants. And that might explain why some things work well or some others work differently. What we've seen with the APOE is with APOE2 is that carriers of this variant, they have a serum proteomic profile that is very different from other people. So they tend to have a series of biomarkers that are much higher or much lower than what happens in the general population without this variant. We have seen that the carriers of it2, they have at the level of the serum proteomics, they have many apolipoproteins are highly connected, highly correlated. So it looks like this gene may affect the co-regulation of many genes. And the other thing that we published recently, a month ago in Advanced Science, is that there is clearly a signature of inflammatory proteins that is different in each two carriers. And the inflammation has not been one of the outcomes of the lipidomics, the lipids. Lipids metabolism has been one of the targets of APOE2 and APOE4. But it looks like there may be also a role for inflammation. And something that, again, is a conjecture, because what we do is a lot of computational analysis. We don't do experiments ourselves. But what we found is there is this particular signature of lymphocytes, of proteins that are secreted by lymphocytes. And what we know is that actually these proteins can be manipulated with some compounds. So that opens the road to maybe investigating some potential treatments for people who don't have APOE2, but you can, by using drugs, you can actually create this beneficial proteomic profile that may protect them from Alzheimer's or, allow them to live longer. But these are hypotheses, really big hypotheses that
Yeah.
we throw out.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I assume you mentioned inflammation. So I assume that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Centenarian have lower inflammation than,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes. So we have seen at the level of very clinical biomarkers that individuals who there are two pieces of the story. So centenarians who do well tend to be less inflamed
Hmm.
than other individuals. But also, if you have a lower level of inflammation, you're predicted to live longer and to be
Yeah,
healthier.
yeah,
And so we did this in long life family study using traditional biomarkers when you do your blood test, standard markers. But then we expanded the story looking at serum proteomics. And that's interesting, but the serum proteomic, the field of proteomics is very challenging because the technology, there are many ways in which you can measure a large number of proteins in serum, but technology have challenges, still challenges. And so some of the results that appear from studies that have used SomaLogic or Link platforms, one has always been a little skeptical. A little bit of skepticism is good. On the other side, in terms of omics, the omics that I am blown away by what we are seeing is serum metabolomics and serum lipidomics. I am so impressed by the yield of results, the reproducibility across multiple studies who use different technologies. I am really impressed by how much we are discovering a very fast amount. We've generated serum metabolomics in multiple studies, and we just are completing a new metabolomic profiles in the participants of the integrated longevity omics. So we have a very large number of serum metabolites, but also lipids, and a scale that has never been done before. And this on a large number of centenarians. So stay tuned because there is a lot coming out soon.
yeah. And one thing that I want to get back to is that you mentioned that you've seen a lot of data that show that inflammation is lower in centenarian than not in centenarian. I'm trying to bring it back to something
Oh,
that applicable for our users. So listeners, sorry. So, for example, I assume that that's a white blood cells count and HSCRP. You see that those are lower in a centenarian than a non-centenarian, correct?
um, we've seen more in general that people who are aging in a healthy way have a lower level of
Okay.
inflammation, those
Of
inflammatory
those
markers.
markers. Yeah.
Yes.
So basically what I'm trying to bring into something that our listener can adopt is check your inflammation marker and try to treat them even when you are young, because there is a correlation, at least correlation, we're not saying causation, with a lower inflammation and basically a longer lifespan of
Right.
humans, correct?
Yes, but I think, yeah, absolutely. This is absolutely true. And the inflammaging story is well understood. The question is, how do you do that? How do you
Yeah,
keep your inflammation good? You know, that you
yeah,
don't want to be too inflamed, but you also don't want to deplete, attack things that should work well. And I think at least for the general population, I think it's good to start thinking about things that we do every day. And to me, what is evident from studies that we've done in the past year or so is that nutrition is a major component. And the food is medicine idea, it's true that food is medicine. And for example, we see in centenarians now, and we have collected diet data on large number of centenarians now. And this is the first time that we can look at this phenomenon, at this type of data. And what we see is that if there is a way to characterize the diet of centenarians is balance and stability. So maintaining a good balance of nutrients that is similar to what younger people can do. No? And I wonder if even correcting, if you have a high level of inflammation, diet may be a tool to reduce your inflammation. Because there are
yeah.
many things that actually interact with the inflammatory markers.
As a Longevity by Design podcast listener, you understand the value of improving your health for today and for all the years ahead. And if you want to live your healthiest, longest life possible, you need to understand what's going on inside. At Inside Tracker, we take a personalized approach to Healthspan optimization that eliminates guesswork from your wellness plan. Inside Tracker analyzes blood biomarker and DNA data, along with physiomarker data from fitness trackers like Oura Ring, to deliver personalized food, supplement, lifestyle, and exercise recommendations that allow you to take control and improve your health span. And for a limited time, Longevity by Design listeners can get 20% off at the Inside Tracker store. So if you're ready to receive a personal health analysis and data-driven wellness plan to optimize your body for the long haul, then it's time to start Inside. Visit insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today. That's insidetracker.com/podcast to get started today.
I don't need to mention, but you are working at Tufts Medical School, and Tufts is one of the leading institute for nutrition. Tufts School of Nutrition is maybe in the top 2 or 3 in the US. And they are doing a lot of research there about nutrition. And I have a few advisors at the Instant Tracker company that basically coming from Tufts. So it's definitely makes sense about nutrition. But what you are saying is interesting about basically try to maintain what you have done as a younger person. And it's very similar in a way to sleep. Try always to go to sleep at the same time. Try to wake up at the same time. Don't eat too close. So in a way, there is we call it sleep hygiene. What you're saying, maybe we have a food hygiene that we need to adopt. And that's maybe will allow us to decrease inflammation that might allow us to live longer. Does make sense?
Absolutely. And live longer and in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Because I'm always a little worried about the idea of, I have a high inflammation, so I can use some supplement to reduce my inflammatory marker. But adding supplements ad hoc, there is a risk of messing up with your whole balance of the diet. And the main source of nutrients come from what we eat every day. So one has to really learn and understand what are the good diet, affordable, because that's the other big deal, affordable diet that can help people stay healthy and physically, with good physical function and cognitive function.
Yeah. And in a way, we were basically developed by evolution to eat food. We haven't developed by evolution to pop a supplement or drug. So absolutely, food is a drug of choice if we can. And some people are looking for the silver bullet. And most of the time, there is no silver bullet. It's to eat well, exercise well, sleep well, and you'll be better.
Exactly. And the food, when I say, what should I eat? Actually, there are things that you can put in the diet, like celery. Right? Yeah. Celery is one of these things, vegetables, without having to be too special or too picky or selecting diet like the Mediterranean diet. I think it's great. I'm Italian, so of course I should all be in favor of the Mediterranean diets. But I think it's really important to think about affordability.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. Is pizza good for longevity? I'm just kidding.
I actually tell you that Italian pizza that has a good balance between carbs and vegetable and proteins, I don't think it's bad for longevity. Yeah. It just maybe if you start diverging from the very simple meal to richer meal with a lot of things, that may not be so good for your digestion. I don't know about the longevity, but
no, it makes a lot of sense. I've been in Italy many times, and everything there tastes 10 times better than here. Even the fruits are better because here we imported them from somewhere that they come to you after a month in the refrigerator, and you can feel that it's not a real fruit. But there you just take it from the tree and eat it. So but again,
a lot of the Italian food is actually very simple, basic, inexpensive food.
Yeah,
it's like so if you have been in Italy, then that in the south, one of the best fish that you can eat is sardine. Yeah. Now we're diverging a little bit, but roasted sardine is one of the best thing you can eat. Very simple, basic food with a lot of the good fats. And very affordable.
Yeah, and I assume that it's much different than the sardine that we find in the can that we are buying here.
Yeah, I think so. Yes. Yeah. Now I become nostalgic. I think that's one of the things I miss of Italy.
No, absolutely. The food is much better there. but we live in the US, at least most of us. So we touch on, and you touch on a bit on the, let's say, molecular profile of Centenarian, and you said that you have done some proteomics and metabolomics and lipidomics. And what I took for what you said so far is it sounds like a proteomics is very noisy. If
Yeah.
you in a different study, you can see different thing, different also technique, all other technique can give you. But what is interesting that I didn't know that you said that actually metabolomics and lipidomics are pretty stable, so it's reproducible from study to study. So what did you learn? Is there a specific metabolite or specific lipid that enrich in Centenarian that is not that we don't see in let's say normal person?
Right. So we actually see, it's true that we see many metabolites and lipids only in centenarians or very old people and not in younger people. But so some of those, I think actually the majority of those are just a marker of very old age. For example, you see marker of lack of steroids, right? And so those are really simply the fact that these are very old people. And we have analyzed a large number now of metabolites in centenarians compared to younger individuals. And what we see is a lot of things that change with age are also different in centenarians because centenarians are very old people. But then there are there are some metabolites and lipids that are detected only in centenarians or are not different in centenarians from younger individuals. And for those that are detected only in centenarian, there seems to be strong correlation with genetics. So, for example, we found that there is a particular combination of a type of lipids that are elevated only in carriers of E2.
Mhm.
And that's an interesting thing, considering the role of E2 and lipids. But we also found that there are markers of diet. Some of those are markers of diet that in centenarians are not different from younger individuals. And these markers tend to change as people get older and their diet change. But we see, for example, we published last year, we saw a marker of flavon, and these flavons are compounds in vegetables. And when I mentioned celery, it's one of the things that popped up last year. We also saw a metabolite that typically changes with older age, but in centenarians is not different from younger individuals. And this is a marker of eating chocolate, which is consistent with a little bit of this myth that dark chocolate is actually good for longevity. And so we see a lot of things that go back to nutrition. But one has to be careful that maybe with the metabolomics, we measure, most of our measurements are related to nutrition. And that's why we find things that point to nutrition as something as important for longevity. So we shouldn't conclude that nutrition is the only thing important for longevity. It's what we can measure there. And we also see connections between serometabolomics and features in centenarians and the gut microbiome. That's the other domain that we are exploring now. The gut microbiome, this is a very difficult area because the technology is there, but so we can measure a lot of DNA of bacteria in the gut, but we don't know what they are. That's the problem. So we have a lot of things we don't know, maybe. So the data, again, have to be always taken with a little bit of skepticism. But definitely there are important connections between the diet, the metabolomics, and the gut microbiome, and potentially affecting then cognition, dementia, Alzheimer's disease risk, and longevity.
Yeah. So a couple of points that you said, and I want to emphasize. So first, the gut microbiome. I think that this is a very exciting new field that they developed, but there are some solutions that are sold to end consumers, direct to consumer, and I don't see a lot of value with that today because we, as you said, we don't know. So the technology is there. We can come and say, hey, you have this is the composition of bacteria, but we don't know what does it mean, and we don't know what to do in order to change it. So I think that the gut microbiome is definitely something that will be very exciting in the future for a consumer. But today, I'm not sure that you can do a lot about that. And I'm glad that scientists like yourself are doing that, are using it, because you will give us the information that then you can implement for end user. And related to the metabolomics, I think that it's very exciting what you said. That I just want to be sure that I got it right. So you said that there are some flavonoid, trace of flavonoid that are higher in Centenarian, but also a trace of some metabolite of chocolate, especially dark chocolate, that are enriched in Centenarian, which might suggest, again, it's a correlation because you haven't done a control study, that consuming more vegetable and consuming more dark chocolate might help you to live longer.
Yes. Let's emphasize might.
Yeah.
Might.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, absolutely. And I think that that's a very interesting. And I also agree with you. Nutrition is important, but nutrition is not the only one. It's exercise, and they have a relationship, and sleep, and so on. We know all of those important things for longevity. And I assume that a lot of the Centenarians are doing it, and you cannot see it in metabolomics because most of the metabolite coming from the food. So what I want to do now is maybe let's try to understand the pathway. So you looked at many different omics, and what are in your what the knowledge, what the data is saying about pathway? What a pathway, biological pathway, modified or different between Centenarian and the normal population, if any?
Right. So when we work with the serum proteomics data, we found many pathways that are very different in Centenarians. Many are linked to the inflammation, but also TGF-beta pathway that can be linked to physical function. So we saw many, and I don't think there is one more important than the other. It's just the connection of all of this together. But so a lot has been published, but these are correlation. For metabolomics, it's a little challenging to link metabolites to pathways because the field is not really, I think a lot is known, but it's not well organized. That you can, when you work with the gene expression or proteomics, there are databases that you can interrogate and say, I have this list of genes, which pathways enriched of these genes. But with metabolomics, this is not true. And it's a very challenging field, starting from how different individuals call the same metabolite with different names. Yeah. So it's really difficult. But there are some pathways that are well characterized. And for example, we see mechanisms that are linked to essential amino acids that are really implicated in many of the analyses we do. And these essential amino acids, again, this is interesting because essential amino acids are amino acids that cannot be produced in the body. They have to be absorbed through food. And then through digestion, then this part are used to participate or generate a chemical reaction that produce a lot of other things. And again, this will go back to nutrition, which I was not actually a person working on nutrition, although I'm at Tufts and I even collaborated with many investigators. Nutrition was not on my radar for exceptional longevity until last year, until we start seeing all these results popping up from studies.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned amino acid, essential amino acid. So do we see, and you said that also you started to measure what Centenarians are consuming. So do we see them consuming more protein on average than a normal person?
Actually, this is really interesting because what we see in the data we have analyzed so far is that as people, typically in a balanced diet, you have about 18 to 20% proteins and around 30%, 35% fats, and the rest are carbs. But then as people get older, there is a shift. So we see that the percent of protein goes down a little bit, but also the percent of fat goes down and the carbs take over. And we've seen people in which the diet is essentially dominated by carbs. And when you think that your grandparents, maybe what they eat is oatmeal and a few pieces of a cake, right? That's really the diet. But in centenarians who are healthy, a nice feature is that their protein consumption seems to be pretty steady. And we're not talking about using protein powder or this sort of things.
Whey
It's
protein they are
maintaining,
drinking.
is maintaining this profile that is the profile of someone who's 50 years younger.
Yeah.
In part, I don't. Again, we say this is really interesting. It could be a marker of these are healthy people, and so they can actually eat in a healthy way, not being the driver. So we don't know how to distinguish this, but this is a feature that we have observed.
So if I understood it correctly, it is correct that the centenarians are consuming on average more protein than someone that is younger than their age but is still old. Let's say average 80 years old person consume less protein than the centenarian at their 90s.
Yes, what we see is that in centenarians who are doing well, they tend to have this profile of nutrients that is similar to younger individuals.
Yeah.
And we've seen this on many other, omics data. We have seen that, for example, many genetic variants of centenarians, and their effect is that biomarker profiles of these associated with these variants are more youthful. So people tend to be younger at the level of GDF15 or APOE or other biomarkers if they carry some genetic variants. So one hypothesis, the nutrition is a mix. We don't know, is this a biomarker of how people are aging or is it driver? So it's a big question. But something that is becoming evident is many biomarkers that we measure, they, as people get older, they change. They go up or they go down. But a measure of the one possible mechanism in Centenarians is that the rate of change of this biomarker is lower. And that determines that they compress the disease, disability, morbidity to very late in their lifetime. So this may actually be a mechanism. How that is determined by genetics, big question. It's a big question. But we see a lot of these correlations.
Yeah. What about the environment? Do we see that a centenarian are living with in a better environment, less noise, less smoke, less pollution, or we don't see any correlation between a better environment and?
We have thought about doing analysis like this. Years ago, we had this very ambitious project. We planned to match centenarians in our study to census data and reconstruct where they lived in the first, say, 10, 20 years of their life.
Yeah.
And we turned out that if you do that for centenarians, you don't have data about pollution because we go back to 1900.
Yeah.
And it was very, very hard. It's a very, very hard thing to do. So to me, one challenge is that it's very hard to reconstruct their overall exposure to pollution or other things when you've been around for 100 years.
Yeah.
And we can measure where they are living now, but this is after 100 they've been around, 100 years they've been around. So it's a very difficult question to answer. Something that is to keep in mind, though, is the pollution. The level of pollution 100 years ago were not lower than today. It may actually have been worse, much worse.
Yeah.
No?
The
way people were living, yes.
Yeah.
No. And so I don't know that escaping pollution is one of the reasons they managed to live this long. It's probably a mechanism to minimize the effect of bad exposure that has allowed them to live longer.
Okay. So if it sounds like it's very hard to answer the environmental question, but I assume that physical activity it's easier to do. So what do we see there? Do we see that they are more active, less active, the same?
It's a mix. It's a mix. Again, there is not a single answer. There are individuals who are very active, and actually, I learned yesterday that there is a little competition, athletic competition in Florida next March that is for very old people, including centenarians. And there are some people who compete, and they're very competitive. But that's, I would say, is not the majority of centenarians we have enrolled. For many, when you've been around 100 years, you're kind of, your body is a little like it's a very old car. Now there are some problems. But social interaction I think is a feature of older centenarians is they have typically very good social networks with the people. And in one of the studies we are doing now, we are measuring the level of physical activity of people. And it's very hard to base this analysis on self-reported, because in a study of longevity, people want to show that they're doing well. And so they tell you, yeah, I walk every day, maybe you don't. But so we give them a tracker, like a Fitbit, something like that. We ask them to wear it for a week. And so we track all their physical activity and the sleep pattern for a week. And the data collection has progressed slowly because it turns out that some of these people really like to wear the tracker and then they don't want to give it back. So it takes longer than we predicted for each person. It takes about 4 weeks. The whole thing takes about 4 weeks. So the data are coming in slowly, but we will have data to answer this question in the future. So we can really have an objective measurement of how active these people are, and is there any connection between the level of physical activity, their physical function, their cognitive function, their health. The hypothesis is that yes, there is. No?
Yeah, and I assume because they are healthier, so they have more chance to be more active. Because when you are sick, you don't feel well, you just want to lie in the bed. And also, I think that they are sleeping better because they are healthier. So it's again going into the chicken and the egg. Why they are sleeping better? Because they are feeling better, or because they are centenarian in genetics? And, it's not easy to answer this question. I agree with you.
And I know on the doctorate, I remember Tom Pearls told me that some of the centenarians he enrolled many years ago, one was older than 105 years, and eventually he had to see a doctor because he fell. And how did he fall? He was repairing the roof of his house.
At the age of 105.
107.
107.
But again, this is not a recommendation for people to do. But just to say, there are some people who reach those ages as really spectacular.
Yeah, interesting. So my next question is about if you were lucky and you were born as the offspring of a centenarian, do you have a better chance to be a centenarian than someone that haven't been born to a centenarian, or not?
So actually, this is a really interesting question, because the hypothesis is if it's only genetics, it will eventually, in families, this genetic predisposition to longevity may go away. But it turns out that we see, at least in the offspring of centenarians we have enrolled, we see that compared to people of the same generation, they're doing much better. And much better in a way that surprised us, because we were thinking, yes, this is a good cohort, but they will not be exceptional as their parents. And we've seen that, for example, in a cohort of centenarians from the New England Centenarian study, we have about 600 offspring of centenarians. Their risk for mortality compared to people of the same generation is 50% less, which is substantial. Substantial. And we see a major protection from the common and bad aging-related diseases like type 2 diabetes, stroke, dementia. We really see substantial protection. If I remember correctly in the numbers, we see a almost 60% reduction in the risk for dementia in this cohort. And but something I like to emphasize, this is the offspring of centenarians who accept to be enrolled in our studies are selected. Because if you're an offspring of centenarians and you're not doing well, maybe you don't want to be enrolled. So there is a selection. So I think the message is there are some of these people who do really well. And that suggests that they have inherited the good variants of their parents.
Yeah, have you considered to look at all of them by just looking at the EMR data or something like that, and try to see whether it's again a selection of the good of the good, or it's the real statistic and really the offspring of centenarian are living longer?
It's difficult to do that. We in some families, in the long-run family study, we had few centenarians and their children enrolled, but we don't have all of them enrolled.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult question to answer
Yeah.
because there are people who have died, and so
Yeah.
we don't know about them,
Yeah.
right? So it's
And,
it's difficult.
and is it does it matter if your mother or your father are centenarian, or it doesn't matter? It's a sex independent of your parents.
At the moment, we don't see a lot of the effect of the parental sex. So if you're inheriting the longevity genes from your mother or your father, we don't see this. But it's also true that the numbers of male centenarians we have enrolled is much smaller than the number of female centenarians. And there's been for a long time a discussion about this, why women live longer than men.
Yeah.
And for centenarians, this is particularly true. So we have almost a ratio 1 to 2, one man for 2 female centenarians. But and I don't know if we don't really know the answer. We don't know
Yeah.
why this happens, but it could also be that the generation of centenarians we have now, we have data now. These are individuals who have gone through World War One and World War Two,
Mhm.
and there's been a major selection because the fittest people went to war.
Yeah.
So the mortality for those generation. So it might be that we have a biased selection of men because many died during the war.
Yeah.
So I don't know that you can make any statement about the effect of parental longevity.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense, but still, you mentioned that even in the normal population, we see that women are living a few years longer than
Yes.
males, and we don't know why. I haven't got a good answer about it. It's still an enigma why women living longer.
I think in part, as a woman, I can tell you that women are more, the resilience of many women is in part compliance.
Yeah.
Because women tend to go and see do their annual physical more regularly than men. There is also the whole phenomenon of smoking that now people have the smoking, this rate of smokers, I think, is very, very low now compared to 20 years ago. But before, men, smoking was a much bigger thing for compared to women.
Yeah.
And the effect of smoking now, you see them in when you reach your 70s,
Yeah.
if you're lucky, if you are a heavy smoker and you reach those ages, the implication on your health are serious.
Yeah, also, I think that you raise a good point. Also, women are less risk takers, so are making less stupid mistakes than the males. So there is a one guy that say, just don't die and you live longer. So males are following that less than women and making more non-calculated gambles, and they can harm their health or life. So
Yeah.
I think that all of that is true, but still, I'm not sure that we really understand it, why women are living longer. We have a lot of
I agree with you that we
assumptions.
don't really
Yeah.
understand why.
Yeah.
And it might be that, there are a lot of genetic differences between men and women.
Yeah.
And hormones that like testosterone
Yeah.
that women don't have and the higher level can actually they can make you more powerful, but they increase your risk for cancer and other diseases.
Yes.
So there are things that are different, between men and women. But I
Yeah.
agree, it's a really important area and we don't really understand, especially for longevity. We don't really understand why.
Yeah. Okay, great. So, Paola, if the listener want to remember just one insight from this exciting conversation about Centenarian, what would it be in your opinion? What is the thing that they should remember?
So to me, there are many actually, but one thing that to me is really important when you start studying centenarians is a change in how you look at aging. Because aging is a scary thing, no? Getting older is a scary thing. But then you meet these people and you see actually there are individuals who can age in a positive, mentally positive way. They can be healthy. So getting older is not just a matter of sickness and being in a bed or not being able to do anything. So it gives me a very positive vision of how you can age if you do the right things, right? So to me, it's important. This is a really important thing of studying centenarians. And then the other thing that I'm always impressed when I am lucky to meet some centenarians in person is the things that they know and how important is it to appreciate older people and the knowledge that they have, what they've seen in their life. And in Centenarians, you can ask them things going back to 100 years ago.
Yeah.
There were no cars around. So it's really amazing what they can tell you. So I've always been fascinated by this. And if you're lucky to have a Centenarians in your family, take good care of them because they're a treasure.
Absolutely. And I really like what you said about Centenarian can show us that aging is not bad. It's actually a positive process and you can enjoy it. And I think that all of us, at least everyone that listens to this podcast, strive to live to 100. So Paola, thank you so much for this rigorous and illuminating conversation. Your work shows us that longevity isn't about a single gene, habit, or biomarker. It's about patterns of protection, resilience, and delayed disease that's emerged over our lifetime. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode of Longevity by Design, please like, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It's helped us discover this science-first conversation. Thanks for tuning to Longevity by Design, produced by InstaTracker. We'll see you next time. And thank you so much, Paola. It was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm always happy to talk about this.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by InsideTracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit insidetracker.com/podcast.